Welcome to That's a Hard No, the podcast about learning to say no and set boundaries. I'm your host, Heather Drago. Okay, I'm going to cut this intro short and get right into it because we want to give you as much time as possible with our amazing guest. I am beyond excited about today's interview. I mean, how many people get to start a book club and then discuss the book they picked with the actual author? Like, who do I think I am, Oprah? Anyway, here we go. Our guest today is Sarah Knight, New York Times bestselling author, Harvard graduate, top book editor, and leader of Fucklings Everywhere, about her book, Fuck No, How to Stop Saying Yes When You Can't, You Shouldn't, or You Just Don't Want to. Sarah is best known for her best-selling series of No Fucks Given guidebooks, including The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck. Her TEDx talk with the same title has been viewed more than 10 million times, and her No Fucks Given podcast has reached more than 1 million downloads. Her latest book is titled Grow the Fuck Up, How to Be an Adult and Get Treated Like One. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us on That's a Hard No and our first ever book club episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm honored.
So I want to start by reading an excerpt. I put too much pressure on myself, and all too often, I didn't listen to the little voice in my head warning me that saying yes was a bad idea. I said it anyway and hoped it wouldn't be that bad. Reader, it was almost always that bad. And then you go on to list a whole bunch of crazy things, including a horrible plane flight that went from Montana to New York via Seattle, which I can't even imagine. And then you say, eventually, all those regrettable yeses and thousands more accumulated to induce my own personal breaking point. I wouldn't say I snapped exactly, but I did quit my 15-year career as a book editor in New York City to go freelance and move to a minuscule Caribbean town where there are approximately 8.6 million fewer people who could possibly ask me to do shit with or for them in any given day. I love this so much. Tell me more about this.
Okay, well, for anyone who doesn't know, the background is I was a book editor in New York City for 15 years. I thought I was going to die behind that desk. I definitely thought that was my career forever. I was going to become a publisher, have my own imprint, done and dusted. And when I was around, we'll call it 36 or 37 years old, I'm 44 now, I really had I reached that breaking point where I was burnt out. I was anxious. I was panicked all the time. And I realized that the problem was my job. So not the actual work, the collaborating with writers, the editing amazing books and discovering new voices, but the showing up every day and having to fit myself into a little corporate box because I'm just not that person. It was a lot of effort. I was very good at it, but it was just a lot of effort. And along with all of those yeses that I was saying in service to climbing the corporate ladder, I was also, going to after work drinks with people that I didn't really want to spend my social time with. And I was saying yes to projects that I wasn't that excited about because I thought that it would make me look better in the eyes of whoever needed me to take it on. And, so it kind of rose to a big crescendo and a breaking point for me. And not only did I decide, okay, I'm leaving the corporate life and I'm going to go freelance as a book editor, but my husband and I also said, if I'm not tied to New York City anymore as kind of the epicenter of American book publishing, then maybe we don't have to live in Brooklyn either. So it was a really, a collection of big life changes all at once. And not perhaps coincidentally, when I left that job and I found myself with a lot more brain space, I had the idea for my first book, The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck. And 6 books later, here we are. The one that you chose for your book club was the previous book, number 5, called Fuck No. And in it, I not only tell, versions of this story, but really give hardcore strategic examples and tips for saying no, how to do it, when to do it, why you should do it, why it's okay to do it. And, I think it's a really practical guide to this somehow very difficult 2-letter word.
Yeah, I mean, it is so practical. I mean, look at my crazy amount of, I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah, it's a lot of flags.
Ridiculous amount of notes. But I just think it's so helpful, and it's also so approachable and fun to read. And there's so many, oh yeah, me too moments. Like it's just, I love it. And that's why we picked it as our first book.
Thank you.
So you go on in this intro to say, I've had more opportunities to say sincere, enthusiastic yes to things that I find interesting, engaging, and important, and to do them happily and well. And then you say, I'm not, yes, I'm still busy with stuff I want and need to do. The difference is that now I'm comfortable saying no to all the other stuff that would make my life even busier or less enjoyable. And this is 100% like the core message of our podcast, which is by saying no, you make room for the right yeses. And so you can live your life. And you also talk about the joy of no. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I always say a fuck not given is something gained. So when you do find it within yourself to say no, I don't want to, I can't afford it, don't have time, then you're opening up a spot in what I call your fuck budget to spend that time, energy, and money on something else, something that either you want to do or that serves you. Sometimes you don't want to get up and go to work, but that's how you get paid and that's how you pay your rent and buy yourself ice cream and do all of the other things that you want and need to do in your life. So you have to make room for that as well. And I call it the joy of no, because not only does it feel good to cast off those obligations and tasks and sometimes people that really are not bringing you any joy or or serving you, but it also feels really good to then have the added time and energy and money to spend on the things that do. It's a win-win. And so, again, there's this mindset about saying no feeling difficult or you're like ashamed or you feel guilty, but really it can bring you so much happiness both to say it and then to have opened up your world to all of the things that you can say yes to as a result.
Absolutely. I mean, I have found that in my journey of learning to say no, like at first when I, kind of cast off those things and I have the quiet time to do the other thing I want to do, there's a little bit of guilt. But then I started to stop and take a minute and say, like, oh my God, I really needed this. Look at what's happened. Like, just really acknowledge like where I was in that moment and how it's because I said no that I could do this. So it's, yeah, totally 100%. I love the fuck budget thing. Or fuck bucks, I should say. I guess it's a budget as
They're
well.
both.
Yeah. It's so funny. I have a business coach and we were talking about an issue and we were talking about our goals and, and she's like, if you do this thing, then what I'm selling you is time, energy, and money. And I wrote those in really big letters on my bulletin board or my whiteboard above my desk. And then I'm reading your book and I see the fuck bucks thing and I'm like, time, energy, money. Hey, wait a minute. Like it. And so I'm applying all these same kinds of ideas towards my business and how I'm running it. So you can do it in life. You can do it as an entrepreneur, like in your job, your regular career. There's like, it's everywhere. It's setting these boundaries and
Yeah, I mean,
understanding what you will and will not
I
do.
think that what I try to do, across all of my books is to really simplify these concepts for people. And
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
setting boundaries is something that makes you nervous or you don't know where to start or you feel like you're not capable, just really, really trying to simplify it and saying, all right, like you don't have an unlimited amount of money in your bank account. Most of us don't, anyway. Certainly not an unlimited amount that you're carrying around in your wallet day to day. So you know that you have to budget it. You know that you can't spend more than you have, or there will be consequences. And the same really applies to your time and energy. We have a limited amount of time on this earth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really just think anytime you're asked to do something, go somewhere, take on a job, spend time with a person that you really can't, shouldn't, or don't want to do, you are asking yourself to spend an extraordinarily precious resource on something that doesn't make you happy or doesn't serve you. And that, I think, even though it's common sense when I say it like that, a lot of people just aren't thinking
Right.
about it that way. They're just in the moment, it's easier to say yes and not have to think it through. In the moment, it's harder to say no. And if you just kind of change your mindset a little bit and realize, like, you're not just saying yes to going to a, you know, like fifth graders soccer game this Sunday, like you're saying yes to 2 hours of your life that you will literally never get back for something that you maybe don't want to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's, just if people can think about the fuck bucks as a budget, and really like, if I spend it on
Mm-hmm.
this, then I don't have it to spend on something else. It tends to kind of unlock this aha moment in people.
Yeah, for sure. I also like the way you talk about mental decluttering and how the your first book was sort of a parody of a certain Japanese tidiness
Mm-hmm.
book, which everybody loved. I still fold my clothes that way. Um, but you talked about discarding things is how you is the equal to setting boundaries, and then organizing things is when you enforce
Mm-hmm.
boundaries. And I just think I like the idea of just simplifying it, like planning ahead, thinking through.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of two-step methods, three-step methods. I think that it really helps people to put ideas into practice. And it's true that the first book began as a parody of Marie Kondo's The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And I just realized that I was taking everything that she was telling you to do for your kids' playroom and your closet and your garage and doing it for my own brain when I quit my job and reassessed my priorities and started saying no to things. And I was basically decluttering my mind. And so it's the same process. It's discard the things that don't serve you, that don't, as Marie Kondo would say, bring you joy, and then organize your life around what you have left or the new things that you can bring in as a result.
Absolutely. I think a lot of that clutter is what you assume other people will think or say, or the guilt that people have absorbed throughout their life and have a hard time letting go of. So let's talk about the people, or the four main personas you identify, the types, the reasons why, that the I call, like, we think of like buyer personas in marketing, so I think of these as personas, right? So there's the people pleasers, the overachievers, the FOMOers, and the pushovers. And I have to tell you, quite honestly, when I took the quiz, I'm like 3.75 out of those four. I'm like worst case scenario. So let's touch on some of those and why they have difficulty saying no.
Yeah, so, I like to also categorize things like this. It just helps readers identify a little bit, with what
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying. They think, "Oh, this applies to me," and sometimes more than one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be most closely identified with an overachiever. I'm someone who says, "Give it to Sarah, she'll get it done." I'm someone who says, "Oh, you're asking me to do that. That must mean that you're going to judge me if I say no, and like I should, and I can do it. Like I'm smart enough, I'm capable enough. No problem." And very much about achieving and wanting to excel and wanting to be seen as excelling. This is something that I've been working through, since I was 10 years old. Some people pleasers are the ones who are really motivated by guilt. They really think, I can't say no because it's going to make somebody feel bad. It's going to let somebody down. It's going to disappoint them. I'm going to be the bad person. They're going to think I'm a bad person. Even though most of the time that guilt is coming from inside the house. It's really not because other people are
Mm-hmm.
actively guilting you. Most of the time you are putting that on yourself before you've even had the opportunity to see what happens if you say no.
Mm-hmm.
People who experience FOMO, the fear of missing out, I am not personally one of those people. It can happen in your personal life, like, you can't make it to a weekend getaway with your friends and you feel like you're missing out on all the fun that they're having without you. It can happen in your professional life if you are faced with the idea of like taking a new job and you really want to have more time in your life to spend with your family, and this job is going to keep you on the road for 6 days a week, but you're afraid that if you don't take it, that it's going to be bad, that somehow it's going to negatively impact you. And then with the pushovers, these are just people who like don't really have a lot of, they can't conceive of the idea of saying no, or they can't make decisions on their own, so they just kind of go with the flow. And it's one thing to be easygoing, but it's another thing to just constantly find yourself in situations that you're like, why am I here? What, how did this happen? It
Exactly.
wasn't
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
were feeling actively guilty. It was just because you
Yeah.
were like, okay, you just didn't have the
Yeah.
strength to kind of think it through on your own. So
Yeah.
those are the four archetypes of
Yeah.
what I call the yes men, the people who say yes for all those different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not so much this anymore, but I used to call it going along to get along. That was my pushover,
Yeah, that's a fair
kind of
assessment.
tendency. And now I'm like, no, I don't really want to do that. So, but it takes practice, it just takes practice. So, um, which I want to talk about. Like when I started, this whole podcast came about because of a challenge I gave myself where I realized I was in a really bad situation because I hadn't said no in a bunch of different ways, like personally and professionally. And so at the beginning of 2019, I forced myself to say no to one thing every day. So I called it finding the no. And it could be a tiny thing like saying no in an email or not answering the phone or something, or it could be a big thing, but I had to find one thing every day. And I messed up a lot. I hurt people's feelings. I was awkward about it. I felt super uncomfortable. Literally can remember just like flushing red, head to toe, nervously sweating, trying to say no. Struggled to say no, and I was afraid if I said no to a potential client, I would lose the opportunity to ever work with them again.
There's that FOMO.
All the things. Yeah, that's the big one. But, and I've never perfected it. And I don't think practice makes perfect. I think practice makes progress, basically. And it's something you have to it's not a read this book and you're one and done. It's like, read this book, use the tips, use the fuck notes, which I think are hilarious. They're like Mad Libs for saying no. It just takes time and practice. Right?
Yeah, and sometimes I sort of feel like a drug dealer because I'm like, just try it and see how good it feels, and you're gonna love it. But really, you do have to step up that cliff. I cannot inhabit your body and brain and force the word to come out of your mouth, but I can give you a lot of good reasons why it would be good for you and your mental and physical well-being to start setting boundaries and saying no. And I can also give you some strategies. And, one of the things that I really tout across all of my books is honesty and politeness. And
yes,
people are sometimes a little surprised to hear that because of, the titles, and they're very sweary, and they're like, oh, she must be very rude. She must be very, aggressive and bitchy or whatever. But no,
she really must not give a fuck.
I think it's really important, particularly just talking about, FOMO. If there's something, take it back to the idea of like a friend vacation. Your friends maybe they've gotten a Hampton house for a week in the summer and it's just out of your budget. You just can't do it. And they've invited you. Just be honest and say, I can't make it because it's just out of my price range. But if you do this again next summer, please let me know. I will save up for it. I will make sure that I plan for it because I would love to be there. If you are embarrassed about your reasons for saying no, or you somehow feel like it's not okay to explain yourself, and you just say no, they might think, oh, she doesn't want to do that. And next year we just won't ask. We'll ask somebody else because she doesn't want to do it. So another thing that I think is really important for people is social anxiety. If you get invited to some kind of event that, you don't want to go to because it just makes you really uncomfortable and it's too much stress, but you don't want your friend or your boss or whoever is doing the inviting to think that you're a flake or to think that you're antisocial. Now, I am antisocial, so I don't care if people think that about me. But if you're worried about that, just be honest. Just say, honestly, these big groups, they give me a lot of anxiety, and I would love to do something one-on-one. I'd love to do something in a small group. Please give somebody else the opportunity to do X, but if you wouldn't mind keeping me in mind for a different version of it, this is a way for people with that FOMO, personal or professional, to be able to say their no's with confidence and know that they are not necessarily cutting off that path forever, which is the fear that motivates you to say yes to everything, even the stuff you don't want to do.
I also love when you talk about the politeness and honesty, you also talk about take a pause. Take a pause and think about your response. You don't have to respond right away. You can even say, let me think about it. I'll get back to you.
That is huge.
I think
huge.
Yeah, I think so.
That's sort of like the if I could leave anybody with a single tip, it is give yourself the gift of time by saying, thanks so much. I'll get back to you. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Let me ask my, spouse. I'll get back to you. Whatever it is, maybe you don't even have to ask your spouse, but you can just say that in order to give yourself that little, that breathing room to really think through your decision. And, you might already have in mind to talk about this later in the conversation, but it brings up a little mantra that I use, which is called Baby Shower 2010.
I love this story.
I said yes to hosting a baby shower for a friend of mine in 2010. And I did it. I felt pressured. I felt put on the spot, for all of these reasons that had nothing to do with my friend or a way that she was actively making me feel. It was all about how I felt in the moment. And I should have thought it through and been like, I'm not the right person to do this. Like, I don't even like children. I don't go to baby showers. Like, why would I do this? But I said yes. And then I got sucked into it and all kinds of things happened. And somebody else got, involved in the planning as well. And that was difficult. And it didn't go well. And so when I'm faced with a decision with accepting something and I say, Sarah, baby shower 2010, baby shower 2010, think about this before you say yes. And it really does help. So find your own mantra and carry it forward.
Sarah, let's talk some more about some of these practical strategies and tools, which I just love. And as you see, I have like 8,000 of these tabs for. I love the why yes, when no method. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So, it's very simple. Ask yourself, why am I saying yes when I really want to say no? What is that motivation behind the yes? Is it because I have FOMO? Is it because I feel guilty? Is it because I feel obligated? I talk a lot in this book about true obligation. You have to show up to your job because that is what they pay you for. That is an obligation. You are obligated to show up if you want to get paid. So many other things are not true obligations, and you really have to interrogate that for yourself when you're thinking, oh, I should say yes. Like, I can't say no. You can. Like, and maybe you shouldn't say yes, and maybe you can say no because it's not a true obligation. So if you find yourself, either you've already uttered the words and you regret them, or you're about to say yes to something, why am I saying yes when I really want to say no? What is that motivation? Because only when you figure out, what your particular personal hangups are is when you can start addressing them. By the way, I noticed that we both are perhaps inadvertently wearing colors that match the cover of Fuck No. So well done.
Yes.
Yeah, subconsciously. I didn't do it on purpose. I don't know if you did, but I think that's very cool.
Yes. So the pink is partially in honor of your brand, but it's also part of my brand. So we're in alignment there. One of the things you talk about when you talk about why yes, when no, is you talk about people being mad at you, like, and the fear of them being mad at you. And a lot of times it's just in your head. It's not, you're just making an assumption instead of investigating it. And so I think that pause you talk about that we were just mentioning, like, that pause is important to do that exercise of why yes, when no.
Yeah, and also it's really important that you understand that most people don't care nearly as much about your life decisions as you think they do. They really are not thinking about it beyond you saying no. They just are going on with their day. It's totally acceptable and understandable. We all engage in this behavior. Like, somebody invites me to something and I say no, and they say, oh, are you sure? I do that to people too. And it's not because I'm trying to make them feel guilty or that I'm mad at them. It's just what you do. It's like just sort of polite conversation making. You're like, oh, it's too bad. We'd love to have you there. And if you're on the receiving end of that, all you need to do is say, yeah, I know, I really can't though, but have fun. And that usually just puts an end to it. You don't have to take this kind of societal tendency toward, oh, are you sure? Like, anything I can do to change your mind, as anything more than just a surface, like, this is a conversation we all have. And, if you want to be a really great person, really great friend, you could try to avoid doing that to your friends and family. You could think a little bit, but like, we all do it. It's just kind of a gut reaction when somebody says they can't make it to something and you're like, oh, that's too bad. We'll miss you. Yeah, I know. I'll miss you guys too. End of conversation. There's a very few very, very small period of time where somebody on the other end of that is actively trying to make you feel guilty and bad. And I have a whole other response for those people.
So would that be the not sorry method? Or would that...
Well, what I say to somebody who really won't let it go is, I think that your inability to take no for an answer says a lot more about you than it does about me. Yeah. And I have had to bust that out a couple of times, and it really does put an end to the conversation. But
yeah, it's funny. I was going to ask about this later in the conversation, but sometimes the people you think are the most enlightened and totally get it about boundaries. Hilariously enough, sometimes those people are boundary pushers and they don't even realize they're doing it half the time. And you kind of have to point it out, and it's a little weird and awkward, but you have to be like, I'm pretty firm about this. I'm telling you this for a reason, and I don't understand why you're pushing me on this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, is that we all have to develop the confidence and the skills to be able to push back like that, unless we want to wind up the pushovers, who are just going along to get along, and wind up doing all the stuff that we didn't want to do in the first place, and in fact that we said we didn't want to do. And this is something that I call the power no, which often comes into play when somebody has asked you repeatedly and you have said no repeatedly, and they ask you again. Sometimes I just don't respond at that point, because it's like, I don't know how many more ways I can tell you that the answer is no.
Yeah.
And this is typically, I'm not going to do this to like a close friend, but there will be sort of unsolicited queries for me to do some sort of professional thing. And I'll say, I don't have time, or no, I can't, or that doesn't really align with my brand or whatever. And if somebody comes back to me, I'm like, I don't know how else to explain this to you. And I'm just like, I'm deleting that email, because there is not enough time in the day for me to have to repeat myself when I was very clear.
Yeah. One of the tips I have about that, I get unsolicited emails 20 times a day. Half of them are, hey, we can build your website for you. And I'm like, did you read my website? Do you see what we do? Like, obviously they didn't, right? Or it's janitorial services for my building. Well, I work out of my house, so unless you're willing to come clean my house, do my dishes, that's not going to work. So I've tried the ignoring them, because I think a lot of my pushoverness is my fear of confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel anxious about it, right? So for a long time, I just ignored the emails, but they keep sending them. Hey, just want to make sure you got this. Hey, obviously you're not that interested, but I really want to talk to you. Like, they just keep sending you the email. And what I learned through my job is that these are cold call emails. There's a script and like a tree, a logic that if you don't respond, they're going to keep emailing you. And then if you don't respond again, they're going to keep emailing you until they get a negative response from you. They're going to keep emailing you. So now that's one of my finding the no things. I find joy in this every day. And I have like a cut and paste thing. It says, no thanks, please take me off your mailing list. Like, boom.
Yeah, that's
done.
That's great and very liberating, and I love it. I often just block those senders, because
I do that too. Then I block them. But it's just like, leave me alone. Just no thanks.
Yeah, and I think I actually even say in the book, you don't have to feel bad saying no to salespeople. If they have a problem being said no to, they shouldn't be working in sales.
Yeah. Yeah, and the person whose name is on this cold lead email, they're not seeing this. They have an email company that's doing it for them. There's not an actual person receiving this on the other end. It's just an algorithm. So you don't have to feel bad, right? But it took me a while to figure that out. It's so dumb. But that's the way I am, I guess.
No. You learn something new every day.
Yeah. I love all these different types. There's so many types of no's that you go into, and I don't want to hype on all of them, but we talked about the power no. I love personal policies. Totally do this. Someone comes to my door, I have a personal policy. I don't buy from anyone who knocks at my door. I don't know you. I didn't ask to talk to you. Go away. You want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, personal policies are a great way to put an end to the conversation almost immediately. I find that when you couch something as a policy, people take it more seriously. It's like they don't question you because you refer to it as a policy. It also sounds kind of mysterious. So they're like, I wonder why she doesn't do that. So for example, I don't do shots.
What happened?
I did shots
Yeah.
until I was in my late 20s, maybe my early 30s, and I don't do them anymore. And I've just found that, alcohol is something that people, and I still drink, I don't do shots. And it's something that people push on you, because that's like, it's fun. And like, oh, come on, do it with everybody. It's a real peer pressure thing. And I just say, I have a personal policy against doing shots. And that really, people are like, oh, like, I wonder why, like, I'm not going to ask because like, that sounds serious,
Yeah.
But it's also, it's just really helpful as like, you can whip it out as a blanket. No, I don't do breakfast meetings. I'm sorry, I have a personal policy against breakfast meetings. People usually will be like, huh, that's funny, or that's weird. Okay, like go on with it. But I've said it's a policy and they don't know why, and I don't have to explain it. And it just kind of tends to just put a little record scratch into the conversation, and it throws people off of their game. And it's a way for you to also say no to things in a blanket fashion when you're worried about upsetting or offending the person. Like maybe somebody who's asking you for a donation. You can say, I have a personal policy against donating to crowdfunding or coworker half marathon charities, because if I say yes to one person, I feel like I have to say yes to everyone, and so I can't say no to somebody and then have them see that I donated to your thing. And so I'm sorry, but I do my charitable contributions in other ways, and I have a personal policy against this. And it's just a good sort of quick and dirty way to kind of say no without having to do too much explaining, and people tend to just take it at face value.
Another one you talk about that I love is the no and switch.
So the no and switch, this is my favorite actually, and I think it's a great strategy for people who are just starting out and who
I find it elegant. It's kind of elegant.
It is, because it's well, I'll explain it and then people will understand.
Yeah.
So the idea is, maybe it's not a hard no. Maybe this is something, a person or a reason that you're willing to entertain, but just not in the way it was asked of you. So one of the examples I give is, say your sister invites you to your nephew's soccer game, and it's it's an hour away early on a Sunday morning, and your nephew is 8 years old. And you're like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get up early on a Sunday. I don't want to, commute 2 hours round trip to watch a bunch of 8-year-olds play soccer. But I do want to be kind to my sister. I do want to develop a relationship with my nephew. I do want to support him in his activities. I do want to support her in her, mothering or whatever. People who are listening to this are probably like, does this girl have any idea how it works with like kids? And I don't, but the example stands. I would not want to do that. Right. I wouldn't necessarily want to hurt anybody's feelings, and I also might want to spend time with my family, just not at 9 a.m. on a Sunday. So you say no, and you offer an alternative. You say, I can't make it, but I'd love to take you both out for lunch after the game. Or I can't make it, and just, insert something that you are willing and able and interested to do with one or both of them as an alternative. And then the ball is in their court. And maybe they'll say, yeah, that's great. And then you are all doing something that you're all willing to do. And this is actually an offshoot of something that my husband and I have and have had in our 23-year relationship, which we call mutual veto power. And it's like, if either of us doesn't want to do something, then we don't do it. Like, I get to say no and he gets to say no, and it's the end of discussion. There's not a fight about it. It's like it goes from choosing paint colors to choosing where we're going to go to dinner, or choosing where we're going to go on a vacation. If I'm not interested in going to Japan, then he's not going to bother me about going to Japan. We will find something that we both want to do, because this way all parties are doing something that they want to do, and no part of any of the parties are doing something they don't want to do. So the no and switch, as you said, I think is a really elegant solution for people who, maybe they do struggle with people pleasing, but they can please other people in a different way that is also good and acceptable to themselves.
And I also like the no for now.
The no for now is really good for FOMOers, to say like, I can't do it this time, but please keep me in mind. I can't do it this time, and here's why. This isn't a permanent reason. This is right now, especially if say you're way too busy to take on a new client, but you're so honored that they asked and you would love to work with them in the future. Tell them that. You don't have to act all like, no, I'm sorry, the answer is no, and have them be like, okay, well, I'm never going to ask that person again. You can say, listen, I would love to take this on, but I am booked to the gills and I will not do a good job for you if I am overbooked. Like, can you maybe delay the start time, or I really hope that you'll keep me in mind next time, et cetera, et cetera. The no for now is a really good one for FOMOers.
Yeah, I have to use that quite a bit. And I just got an opportunity recently, and I went back and I said, here, I see your response date for your RFQ, and I see the timeline for your projects. Is there any wiggle room? Because I would love to work with you again on this. And they said, unfortunately, there isn't. And I was like, well, okay, unfortunately, I can't bid on this one, but please keep me in mind the next time, and they were totally fine with it. So you know, I think they just respect when you say you can't do something.
Yeah, and particularly if you're able to give the reason like, I'm not going to say yes and do a half-ass job for you, you know. And then sometimes the person on the other end of that will be like, oh, all right, I like this person. They have integrity. Maybe I will switch some things around on my end to so that I can work with them. You know, you never know. That's why honesty is so important.
Yeah, and I like the the trust you build when you're, you know, when you're clear and you say, look, I can't do this in this amount of time. How can we figure out another way? Usually people are, you know, cooperative. They know you want to do it and you'll do a good job as long as you have the right
Yeah. I mean, in
circumstances, you
fact,
know?
if I may, so slightly off topic for a second,
Yeah.
in my new book, Grow the Fuck Up, which is about being an adult and getting treated like one, I talk about how
Hmm.
you not only have to be considered dependable and reliable and trustworthy and
Yep.
respectable, to set expectations, tell people what they can expect from you and when, but also make sure that you're managing expectations, because when things do go off track, you just need to be able to own up to it and tell people right away what the new set of circumstances is, because the only
Hmm.
thing worse than somebody you can't depend on is somebody who could have given you a heads up and didn't. You know, just
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
tell the truth. Like, be honest,
Yeah.
be timely, explain what's going on, set expectations and manage them. It is a hill I will die on. Now we can go back to saying no.
No, 100%. I actually heard you say that in an interview of talking about the book, and I was like, "Amen, sister." You know, as a business owner, I'm counting on people, and a lot of them are younger 20 somethings that are working for me. And it's an issue when someone says they're going to do something and they don't do it. It doesn't just affect me, it affects a lot of people down the line. And it's really important for people, if they want to be taken seriously, to be dependable, and when they can't be dependable, be honest about it. So in that way they're being dependable, right? Like, you can't just cut off communication because you're afraid of what your boss is going to say,
Yeah, I mean, it
right?
just snowballs and it makes everything worse for
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah. And I have to say, I haven't read all your books. I've read excerpts from your books. I've seen a lot of your interviews discussing the different books. It just seems like there's this through line through all the books where it's just sort of this common sense stuff. The boundary stuff starts in the beginning with your first book, right? It's just you kind of delve into different avenues or different parts of these concepts. So it's really just a lot of common sense, do what you say you're going to do, show up, um, take a pause, be polite, be honest, right?
Yeah, I think,
Am I wrong?
no, you're absolutely right. And I think that I kind of feel like this stuff is all very obvious. And then, I'll be drafting the books, and my editor will say, okay, but how do you do this? I'm like, you have to set boundaries. Okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
how? I'm like, you do it. This is what you do. And he's like, no, you need to explain this, because a lot of people
Right.
just don't have an inherent understanding of, or a certain baseline level of confidence in doing certain things, and you really need to map it out. So these books, they really, I refer to them as the no fucks given guides in their entirety, and they really are, they're guidebooks. They're just
Mm-hmm.
ways to kind of look at these really complicated or seemingly complicated issues and difficult issues that are, about interpersonal relationships and, professional success and goal setting and confidence building and managing anxiety. I wrote a whole book called Calm the Fuck Down. And I'm somebody who's diagnosed with, generalized panic disorder. So, I'm talking about it from somebody who's actually like been really in the throes and depths of anxiety, not just situational, discrete things that stress you out.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea behind that book and all of mine is that you can really distill all of this to simple strategies that will carry you through even the most complex difficulties. And so, if saying no to your kids, if you find that difficult, some people think saying no to their mother-in-law is the hardest thing. Some people think saying no to their boss is the hardest thing. But the underlying strategies are all the same.
So I want to talk about a couple more things, then I want to get to your new book a little more. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Some other no's that I think are important to talk about are receiving the no's, accepting no. If we're talking about setting healthy boundaries, then we have to be willing to receive them. Do you have any advice for that? Like, I have friends or family members, and I'll say no, and they just keep pushing, 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 and I kind of blurt out what I said earlier. But Any advice about accepting no when you really don't want
I
to?
mean, I think it's always really helpful to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you know? And if somebody says no to you and you don't like it and you don't want to accept it and you want to push back, I would stop and think, how would you feel if this
Mm-hmm.
person was pushing back on you? Like, really think to yourself, everybody has their own reasons for saying yes,
Mm-hmm.
for saying no, for doing what they want or not doing what they don't want to do. And if you're expecting them to respect yours, then you need to respect theirs. So before you get pushy, and there may be reasons, you know, there are exceptions to every rule, and there may be very good
Mm-hmm.
reasons why you really want to make a good faith effort to change somebody's mind about something. But before you do that, really think about, what is this situation? Is it just that I want what I want? Is it just that I'm surprised they said no, and so I'm kind of conditioned to push back? You know, why do I feel like I can't take this no for an answer? And if you can honestly answer, you know what? Like, that's fine. Like, I don't need to bother them about it. Like, it's okay. I can accept it because I would want them to accept it from me. I
Mm-hmm.
think, again, that's a situation of spending a little bit of time just taking a pause, looking at it holistically,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll find, I think you will find it easier to just be like, okay, no problem. I'll figure out something else.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I love that you touch on towards the end of the book, and I just really so appreciate it, is it's okay to say no when someone asks, "Are you okay?" And I love you're like in all caps, you're right. Do I look okay, Susan? Like, it's so funny. But like, or how often do people say, "Hey, how are you?" And like, on reflex, we're like, "Fine, how are you?" But it's okay to say, "You know what? I'm having a really rough day."
Yeah, this is something that crops up across the books, and you know, I'm really committed to mental well-being because part of this sort of journey, if I may use that word somewhat ironically because it's an icky word, part of this journey of becoming, you know, a globally best-selling personal development book author,
Anti-guru. Yeah.
was that, you know, I had a lot of my own problems that I was working through and solving, and I had issues with mental illness and with, you know, physical issues with eating disorders and, you know, just like really, really tough, thorny things that I had to work through from the time I was really young. And so I always want to acknowledge that you can be in the same way that I'm, you know, encouraging you to be honest about what you want and what you don't want and what you need and what you deserve and going after it. I also encourage you to be honest and vulnerable and open in explaining to people when you don't feel particularly confident and you don't feel particularly good and maybe you don't know exactly what you want and you're not sure why you don't know. I think that, you know, this is, like I said earlier, when you're trying to say no because you don't want to go to an event because you have terrible social anxiety, like telling people why means that they won't keep asking you and
Mm-hmm.
putting you in that position over and over again.
Right.
Like, this is where that honesty comes in handy. And you know, sometimes it can feel really good to say no, not just the joy of no, of not doing a thing, you know, not spending eight
Mm-hmm.
hours of your weekend on something you didn't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
but it can feel really, there's a lot of relief to be found if somebody says, you know, are you doing okay? And you're like, no, I'm not. Can we talk about it?
Yeah. 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 And you'd be surprised how often people are willing to sit and listen or at least empathize with you. And we had a guest, Beverly, on. She was talking about talking with children and how parents often, you may not know this, I'm joking with you, um, but a child may say, are you okay? And a mom's instinct may be to say, I'm fine, and hide it. But she talked about saying you don't have to tell them all the gory details. You can just say, you know what, I'm having a rough day. Um, a couple of things didn't go my way, and I'm a little upset about it. But I'll be all right. And thanks for noticing. Thanks for asking about it. And just that's it. That end of subject. Um, so I think it's yeah. I love that you're normalizing that and telling people they have room to be honest. Yeah. Um, so tell us a bit about the new book, which I have. I have a 21-year-old and a 26-year-old, so I'm like already planning on buying
Ooh, they're
this book.
primed. They are primed. Um, well, the new book is called Grow the Fuck Up: How to Be an Adult and Get Treated Like One. That's very important because I want people to
Hmm.
understand that adulting does not have to be onerous and difficult, and the idea of taking on all of this responsibility, it is also really rewarding because the more effort you put into being a self aware, responsible, dependable, independent, resourceful, accountable adult, the more you are going to get back in freedom and trust and respect from others, from people around you. Because, like we talked about earlier, if you're somebody who people know they can depend on because you set expectations and manage them, then you're also not
Hmm.
going to have somebody hovering over your shoulder all the time and poking you and prodding you and are you done and is this in? I only do that to people that I don't trust. The people who are
Exactly.
total fucking grown-ups in my life who I know that I can trust, I leave them alone to do their, to do their thing. Um,
Hmm.
and so I want readers of this book to understand that there's a lot to gain from it. It's not just about how to kind of master sort of onerous adult tasks, although it is that too. And
Hmm.
the other thing is that I want people to know it's actually for people of all ages. I started writing the book during the pandemic, during the heat of the lockdown. My brother and sister-in-law got pregnant with their first child, and so I was going to become a first-time aunt. Um, as I mentioned, I don't have kids of my own. I'm in my mid 40s. I had a bunch of childless aunts growing up, and so I sort of felt like a baton was being passed. And I hadn't written
Awesome.
a book that was kind of focused on talking to young people and preparing them for what life is going to throw their way. And I thought, this is kind of an interesting idea. Let me work this out. But as I was developing it and as I was writing drafts with my editors, we realized everybody needs this. This is,
Yeah.
being a functional adult is about being mature and responsible and accountable. And there are very few of us, whether we are 21 years old or 51 years old, who don't need a little help in one or more of those areas. So it grew from there.
Yeah, I heard you talking about this and I heard you describe there's real babies, big fucking babies, theoretical adults,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And then
Total fucking
what was the
grown-ups.
tonal funny? I the big babies just one just cracked me up because how many people have we known or worked with where you're just like, how old are you? Why haven't you learned this yet? Like,
Yeah, and
what?
actually there's a slight distinction to be made between people who have learned it. They understand how things should be, how they should be acting, and they understand, the concept
Hmm.
of consequences, but they just don't care. They're not going to do
Hmm.
it. And that's a big fucking baby. Actual babies, they come into the world, they don't know anything. They're not expected to be mature
Right,
and
right.
responsible. We get it. You're an actual baby. Like you're gonna need some time to figure this out.
Hmm.
Hopefully people
Hmm.
will be modeling good behavior. Sometimes they'll be modeling bad behavior and you can learn from that. But if you don't take that forward into your adult life and use what you have learned, then you are a big fucking baby. And you are just as, lazy and dependent and rude as an actual baby who doesn't know what they're doing, except you know what you're doing. You're just sitting around waiting for
Right.
everybody to do things for you like an actual baby, except you could be doing them for yourself. You just don't want to. But it's the next step up in that evolution of adulting, the theoretical adult, which is where most of us lie. We're adults in age, we're adults in mentality, but we haven't maybe necessarily been able to put it all together all the time. And that's what the book really helps you do. Maybe you have problems being mature, maybe you have problems dealing with your emotions and practicing self-control, but you're really, really responsible. The maturity angle is one that you could use some work on. And for me, the accountability is the hardest. I mean, I don't like being told I'm wrong. I don't like being wrong. I don't like taking criticism. It doesn't feel good. And I know a lot of people for whom that's really easy. It's like water off a duck's back, but they also can never be on time. And I find I'm pathologically on time. So these three pillars of maturity, responsibility, and accountability, we all have ways in which we could improve in at least one area. And once you do, and once you know how to put that together and you're committed to putting it together, even if you don't get it right every time, you're a total fucking grown up. It's about making the commitment to try.
Yeah. Is there any last tidbit or thing you want to share or something we didn't talk about related to boundaries you'd like to leave for a thought to leave on for our listeners?
Well, I said it a little bit earlier, and I think it bears repeating. A fuck not given is something gained. So when you decide to say no because you don't care about something, it doesn't make you happy, or it doesn't serve you, and you don't give your fucks in the form of your time, energy, and money to that thing, you are gaining back that time, energy, and money to spend on something that really does make you happy, that you really want to do, and that really serves you. And I think that's just very a distillation of the power of boundaries and the power of saying no.